It was exactly 9 p.m. on Christmas Eve. The house was freezing, completely dark on purpose. From my window, I watched a locksmith quietly scratch at my front door lock. I knew exactly who paid him to be there. I recognized the headlights idling in the driveway, and I could hear the faint sound of my brother's arrogant laughter echoing across the snow. My parents were out there too. What they carried in their hands that night was far more damaging than a set of lockpicks. Tonight, I'm going to tell you the story of every single holiday my family spent keeping me out of their home, and the one fateful night they tried to steal mine. If you have ever been treated like an afterthought, or if you've ever been the empty chair at someone else's holiday table, this story is dedicated to you. Welcome back to Drama and Destiny Stories. I'm Charlotte. I am 36 years old, and today's narrative is deeply personal. For over 2 decades, there was never a place for me at my family's table. They never once imagined that the tables would turn, that one day I would be the person deciding who got to step through the front door. They had absolutely no clue who was already inside that house with me, sitting silently in the dark, waiting for them to cross the line. Before we dive into how this trap was sprung, make sure to drop a comment below sharing your own experiences with difficult family dynamics, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss our deep dive stories. Let's go back to where the math first failed. The very first holiday I remember counting chairs, I was only 8 years old. We owned this massive scratched oak dining table. Every single December, my mother would transform it into something straight out of a luxury home magazine. She used crisp linen napkins, the finest porcelain plates, and a handmade centerpiece of pine cones lightly dusted with artificial snow. I counted the place settings that year because, even at 8 years old, I had already subconsciously learned that space was limited. There was a chair for my father, one for my mother, a spot for my 4-year-old brother Travis, 2 for my grandparents, and 1 for my aunt. And then, the table just ended. I stood perfectly still in the doorway, wearing my velvet church dress, waiting for an adult to look up and notice the error in the math. My mother was the one who finally caught me staring. She didn't snap or get angry. That was the most disorienting part about her. She simply crouched down, smoothed out my collar, and offered me a small, mournful smile. It was the kind of expression you give a child who has asked an impossible question. "We can only set so many places at the table, sweetie," she murmured gently. Then she handed me a loaded plate and pointed me toward the kitchen. I ate my holiday dinner all alone that night, perched on a wooden stool right next to the hot stove, listening to the roaring laughter echoing from the dining room. I spent years rationalizing it. I was a bright child, and bright children are exceptionally talented at inventing excuses for the things that break their hearts. I told myself it was just a crowded year, or that we simply had too many visiting relatives. But the next December, the table was short a chair again. And the year after that, the guest list shifted. My aunt stopped traveling. My grandparents eventually passed away. Yet somehow the table never magically opened up a spot for me. The shortage was never actually about a lack of furniture. It took me 20 long years to fully accept the truth. The shortage was only ever about me. Let me clarify something crucial, because people frequently assume the worst when they hear stories like this. Nobody ever laid a hand on me. No one screamed insults at me, locked me in a basement room, or explicitly told me I was worthless. If they had, perhaps the reality would have clicked sooner. Overt cruelty loudly announces itself. Universal neglect and absence just leave you wandering in a maze of self-doubt. What I received instead was a calculated, quiet kind of nothingness. On holiday mornings, the beautifully wrapped boxes under the tree bore delicate name tags, written in my mother's elegant cursive. Gary, Travis, Mom, followed by a handful of names for extended cousins. I would literally kneel on the living room rug and read every single tag twice, the exact way you reread a failing exam grade, desperately hoping the text will magically change. My name was never there. Eventually, later in the afternoon, a practical item would be handed over to me with an apology already baked into the presentation. "We just didn't want to spoil you, Charlotte." In every single family photograph from my childhood, I am positioned slightly to the absolute edge of the frame, half cropped out, as if the camera lens itself couldn't quite decide if I belonged in the family portrait. Because of this, I learned self-reliance remarkably early. I cooked my own breakfast at age 7. I packed my own school lunches. I taught myself how to braid my own hair by studying my blurry reflection in the stainless steel toaster. By the time I turned 12, I possessed the skills to manage an entire household, even though absolutely no one had asked me to. I spent years operating under the delusion that if I just made myself useful enough, compliant enough, and perfect enough, the family table would eventually expand to hold me. I strained harder than any child ever should. I completely ignored the heavy burning question resting at the bottom of my soul. Why was it only me? Why, in a nuclear family of 4, did the math consistently fail to include just one specific child? There was exactly one object in our entire household that was strictly off-limits, hidden away on my mother's master dresser. It was a small tarnished silver frame, always turned carefully toward the wall. I had no idea that the dark secret hidden inside that frame held the key to my exile, or that decades later, my brother would use that exact emotional wound to try and ruin my life. What was inside the frame? Stay tuned because everything changes in the next chapter. I walked out of that house the exact morning after my 18th birthday, in the spring of 2007. I had been hoarding money for years the way a refugee saves for a ticket out of a war zone. I saved babysitting cash, skipped school lunches, spent a grueling summer scooping ice cream, and cleared snowy driveways all winter long. By the time I legally became an adult, I had $1,100 rolled tightly into a gym sock and a rusted, beat-up Corolla I'd purchased for $400 of those dollars. I packed a single duffel bag with a few clothes, a toothbrush, my high school diploma, and the lone photograph of myself where I was actually centered in the shot. A photo taken by a classmate's mother who didn't understand my family's unspoken rules. Nobody attempted to block the door. My mother remained stationed at the kitchen sink, washing dishes. My father didn't look up from his newspaper. Travis, who was 14 and already treated like an untouchable prince, kept his eyes glued to the television screen. "Give us a call whenever you land," my mother said flatly. That was the entirety of my goodbye. I drove east for 3 straight hours, pulled into a deserted diner parking lot off the state highway, and allowed myself to cry hard exactly once. Then I walked inside, ordered a plate of cheap eggs, and made myself a solemn vow over a cup of terrible diner coffee. Someday I would own a property that was entirely my own. A real home. A fortress with a solid door, a heavy lock, and my name explicitly printed on the legal deed. A place where absolutely no one could ever decide there wasn't room for me. I had zero clues on how to achieve it, but I knew I would. I started building that dream with a yellow bucket. That isn't a metaphor. I literally launched my life with a single plastic bucket, a cardboard box of microfiber rags, and basic cleaning supplies I bought at a local dollar store. My very first client was an exhausted single mother pulling double shifts at a hospital. I deep cleaned her kitchen so thoroughly that she broke down in tears when she walked back inside. She immediately recommended me to 2 friends who recommended me to 2 more. During that intense first year, I slept in the front seat of that Corolla far more nights than I care to publicly admit. I'd park behind a 24-hour grocery store, recline the seat, and wrap myself in a worn blanket I bought at a thrift shop. I kept a $9 a month gym membership solely, so I could use their showers every morning before meeting clients. Every single dollar that entered my hands was split systematically into 3 separate mason jars: fuel, supplies, and the someday house. When you grow up internalizing the message that you aren't quite enough, you develop a fierce, terrifying obsession with perfection. You refuse to fail, because you believe that any failure is definitive proof that your neglectful family was right about you all along. So, I violently over-delivered on every job. I scrubbed baseline trim that homeowners would never see. I drove back to properties on my own dime to touch up minor details no one had complained about. I pulled shifts when I was running high fevers. I pushed through absolute physical exhaustion. I eagerly volunteered to work major holidays because clients paid double, and because I had absolutely nowhere else where my presence was requested anyway. That grueling work ethic made my business incredibly successful. It also pushed me to the brink of a nervous breakdown multiple times. By the time I hit 25, I had hired my first pair of full-time employees. By 28, I had graduated from my car to a real commercial office space, complete with a professional logo and a registered brand name, Booth Home Care. We didn't limit ourselves to basic maid services. We monitored high-end properties when corporate clients traveled, oversaw complex estate move-outs, and provided meticulous property care for the elderly. I was literally constructing a thriving corporation out of the exact element that had been denied to me as a child. Creating spaces where things were protected, where everyone belonged, and where no one was left out in the cold counting chairs. You would think that achieving financial security and growing up would have healed the childhood wound. It didn't. The very first winter holiday after I moved away, I called my childhood home from a freezing payphone outside a grocery store. My mother sounded mildly startled to hear my voice, then instantly distracted. I could hear a wall of vibrant noise filtering through the receiver, upbeat holiday music, clinking glasses, and dozens of laughing voices. "Are you guys hosting a party?" I asked carefully. "Oh, it's just a little holiday gathering for the immediate family and a few close neighbors," she replied, using that exact same soft, melodious voice she'd used when I was 8 years old. "We can only set so many places, honey. You understand, right?" I was 19 years old, completely isolated, freezing in a parking lot 3 hours away, and I still quietly whispered, "Of course, Mom. I understand." I drastically stopped calling after that evening, but while I was out scrubbing floors to survive, my brother Travis was being handed everything on a silver platter, until he made a catastrophic financial gamble that ruined him. Desperate for a lifeline, he turned his sights on me. He thought I was still that broken little girl with a duffel bag, completely unaware that I was about to catch him red-handed. Keep watching because the betrayal is about to get incredibly calculated. While I was keeping my head down and expanding my business, Travis was learning a completely different set of life lessons under the exact same family roof. Where I was forced to master self-reliance, Travis learned that a safety net would always magically appear to catch him. If he wrecked a vehicle, a replacement appeared. If he failed a college course, an elaborate excuse was manufactured by my parents. The word no simply didn't exist in his universe. He grew into adulthood thoroughly convinced of one foundational truth: that the world owed him a perpetual soft landing. Consequently, Travis became a man who launched endless business ventures and finished absolutely none of them. There was a commercial lawn care company that went bankrupt within months, a vending machine route that mysteriously evaporated, and a boutique consulting firm that consisted entirely of an expensive leased truck and a fancy landing page. Every single time a venture imploded, my parents stepped in to absorb the financial blow. They repeatedly remortgaged their own financial security, draining their retirement funds piece by piece, proudly labeling the enabling behavior as helping our son. I watched this train wreck unfold from a strict distance, getting updates from a chatty extended cousin named Patty, who couldn't stop herself from broadcasting family gossip over the phone. "Your folks bailed Travis out of another hole," Patty would chuckle dryly, treating the financial ruin like a passing weather report. "That boy could fall face first into a muddy lake and come out with a prize fish inside his pocket." But the prize fish were running out. Travis had recently married a woman named Megan, and the two of them instantly bought an extravagant house they couldn't afford, filling it with luxury items they couldn't pay for. Underneath all the parental bailouts, a massive avalanche of debt was quietly mounting. The dangerous kind that doesn't vanish when your mother writes a small check. I didn't know the exact financial figures yet, but I knew my brother's psychology, and I knew that an entitled man raised to believe the universe owes him a soft landing will eventually try to extract it from whichever family member is doing the best. The turning point arrived in September of 2025. I discovered a gorgeous historic property on a quiet street called Maple Hollow. It was a massive 3-story brick estate built in 1912, featuring a magnificent wraparound porch and a beautiful turret room. It had been deeply loved decades ago, then severely neglected, requiring the kind of structural renovations that instantly terrify typical buyers. It didn't intimidate me. I had restored 100 houses just like it for wealthy clients. I knew its structural bones. The afternoon I walked through the empty front hallway, I stood beneath the high ceilings and could vividly see my future. A long, grand dining table positioned right by the windows, set beautifully for whoever I chose to invite into my life. I purchased it entirely in cash. Every single dollar of that down payment was built directly from my yellow cleaning bucket, my corporate fleet, and 15 solid years of absolute refusal to fail. At the closing table, my hand cramped from signing so many legal documents, but I didn't care. Every stroke of the pen anchored that estate firmly into my possession. When the real estate attorney slid the final deed across the mahogany table, I stared at the legal designation printed at the very top. Granda Charlotte Booth, sole owner. I had spent my entire existence being a person who didn't count. Now, I held a certified government document that stated I was the only one who counted. I drove over to Maple Hollow that night, sat on the dark front porch steps all by myself, and let the reality sink in. The 18-year-old girl crying in the diner parking lot would have never believed it. I had successfully built the one fortress no one could ever lock me out of. It took roughly 3 weeks for the family network to discover what I had done. Patty had mentioned my real estate purchase to her sister, who immediately ran to my mother. The entire emotional temperature of my family shifted overnight. My mother called me on a random Tuesday afternoon. This was a woman who literally had not initiated a phone call to me on a non-holiday in over a decade. Her tone was dripping with a sweet, syrupy warmth that instantly triggered my internal alarms. I had spent 36 years mastering the precise structural difference between her genuine warmth and her useful warmth. "I hear you bought yourself a magnificent old estate, Charlotte," she chirped lightly. "We would absolutely love to drive up and see it. It has been far too long, honey." 2 days later, Travis sent me his first text message in an entire year. No basic greeting, just rapid-fire questions. How many bedrooms? What was the final purchase price? Was it a solid investment? And then he dropped the one question that made me freeze. Who is the house legally listed under? Just you. I stared at that little string of text for a long time. There are questions people ask out of casual curiosity, and there are questions people ask when they are calculating the value of an asset. Having run a successful enterprise for 15 years, I knew exactly what it looked like when someone was sizing up property. Instead of confronting them, I followed my instincts and scheduled an emergency meeting with my real estate attorney, a ruthless, incredibly sharp woman named Ruth Calloway. I laid out the sudden barrage of odd texts and calls. "Ruth, can someone legally steal a house out from under you if they're desperate enough?" I asked bluntly. Ruth paused, the distinct type of silence a seasoned professional makes before delivering terrible news. "It happens significantly more often than the public realizes," Ruth warned me. "In fact, it's one of the fastest-growing property crimes in the country right now. It's called deed fraud." She broke down the simple mechanics. Someone easily forges your signature onto a basic document called a quitclaim deed, which legally transfers ownership of a property. They take that forged piece of paper down to the county recorder's office. The clerks at the window do not verify the authenticity of the signatures. Their administrative job is simply to record whatever document is handed to them. And just like that, on public record, your home officially belongs to a criminal. The most terrifying aspect of deed fraud, Ruth added grimly, is the demographics of the perpetrators. Public statistics show that roughly 9 out of 10 times, it isn't an international hacker or a stranger. It is a family member or a close friend. 9 out of 10. Family. I sat back in my chair as a heavy weight settled into my stomach. It wasn't shocking. It was the most chillingly believable scenario I had ever heard. "There has to be a defensive shield," I said. "There is," Ruth smiled. "The county recorder offers a complimentary service called a property fraud alert. You register your legal name and your real estate parcel ID. The absolute millisecond any document, lien or title transfer is filed against your property, the system automatically fires an instant notification directly to your phone. It won't physically stop them from filing a forged paper, because the administrative system is fundamentally flawed at the counter. But you will discover the crime the exact hour it happens. And in asset protection, time is everything. I enrolled in the fraud alert program that exact afternoon. I kept my enrollment completely secret. I didn't tell a soul. I placed my real deed in a secure file folder and waited. It took exactly 2 months for the trap to spring. On a quiet Wednesday afternoon in December, my phone buzzed with an emergency alert from the county. Someone had just officially signed my house over to Travis. How did I react? I didn't call the police immediately. I decided to let them think they had successfully stolen my life. Here's why. The full financial picture finally dropped into my lap via Patty in late October. Travis was drowning. He had personally guaranteed a massive $90,000 commercial business loan for his failed venture, and the corporate lenders were coming to collect. Furthermore, he and Megan had defaulted on their luxury rental payments, and their landlord had officially initiated eviction proceedings. My parents had hit their absolute financial breaking point. There was no liquidity left to bail him out. Their own house was fully leveraged. "Your mother is completely falling apart," Patty whispered into the phone. "She keeps crying that the family name is going to lose everything." I sat in my pristine kitchen and calculated the variables. A $90,000 looming debt. An entitled brother who believed he deserved a soft landing. A sister with a fully paid-off historic mansion. A mother who had suddenly developed an intense interest in visiting that asset. The pieces formed a horrific picture. The sudden family warmth wasn't a beautiful path toward healing. It was reconnaissance. My brother was staring at the only debt-free asset associated with the family name, and he was desperate enough to commit a felony to seize it. In November, my mother officially extended an invitation. "We want you to come home for Christmas Eve dinner, Charlotte. Just like the old days. There is a place saved for you at the table. There has always been a place for you." Hearing that sentence should have healed my inner child. Instead, it made me physically sick. You do not suddenly offer a seat to someone you have spent 20 years systematically erasing from the family math. Not unless you desperately need them away from their own house for an evening. Then came another text from Travis. "Hey, with an old house like that, you need to make sure your important documents are secure. Where do you even keep your original deed? Do you have a fireproof safe at home?" He wasn't asking about my well-being. He was mapping out the physical location of my paperwork. Instead of deleting the message, I took a pristine screenshot, preserved the digital timestamp, and saved it into a hidden folder on my device. I played the part of the clueless, lonely girl. I texted back, "Oh, I'm so disorganized with that stuff. Paperwork bores me to tears. Let's all chat about the house after the holidays." I could practically hear them celebrating through the network. They truly believed they were reeling me in. They had absolutely no clue I was archiving every single receipt. The hammer dropped on Wednesday, December 3rd, at exactly 4:47 p.m. My phone vibrated with an automated email from the county web portal. The subject line was cold and administrative. Property fraud alert. New activity detected. I opened the document with completely steady hands. 1. Document type quitclaim deed. 2. Monitored parcel, Maple Hollow Estate. 3. Grantor Charlotte Booth. 4. Granted Travis Booth. According to the official public records of the county, I had just legally gifted my entire historic estate to my younger brother for $0. I had signed absolutely nothing. I had spent that entire business day inside my corporate headquarters surrounded by 11 staff members and a calendar packed with meetings. Travis had meticulously forged my signature, brought a corrupt or tricked notary into the scheme, and filed the document at the county window. I drove to the recorder's office the following morning, paid the processing fee, and secured a certified copy of the fraudulent deed. I forced myself to examine the forgery. The perpetrator had clearly practiced. They had nailed the elegant structure of my initial C. But the rest of the text was fundamentally flawed, the precise tilt of the T, the specific loop of the H. It was the work of an amateur who practiced just enough to fool a busy county clerk, but not nearly enough to fool the actual owner. That afternoon, I walked into the local police precinct and presented my case to a veteran detective named Ray Foster. I didn't walk in crying or frantic. I laid out a perfectly organized binder, the original deed, the certified forgery, my corporate calendar proving an alibi, the timestamp text from Travis inquiring about the deed, and Megan's suspicious inquiries regarding notary procedures. Detective Foster sat back in his chair, a look of profound respect crossing his features. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "in over 2 decades of law enforcement, I have rarely seen a property victim walk into my station this incredibly organized." He explained that this was a severe Class 1 felony. He confirmed that while my attorney could easily nullify the paperwork in civil court, the criminal case would become absolutely bulletproof if we caught them attempting to physically seize the property. "They have the paperwork," Foster explained. "Now, to secure a loan or a fast sale, they need to establish physical possession of the asset. They need to change the deadbolts and look like the rightful residents before you even realize what happened. And the absolute best time to do that is when they think the house is completely abandoned," I finished. We both knew what night they would choose. They chose Christmas Eve because for 20 years, the core narrative of my family was that Charlotte spends the holidays completely alone, unwanted, and out of town. The very story they used to hurt me was about to become the precise walls of their own cage. I explicitly rejected my mother's holiday invitation, text messaging her. I think I'm just going to clear out of town for a quiet, solitary holiday trip this year. I need some desperate rest. I heard her text back within minutes, dripping with false sympathy. The date was locked in. On Christmas Eve, I executed the perfect performance of an empty home. I parked my corporate vehicle 3 blocks away and slipped into my house through the backyard in total darkness. I left every single light fixture turned off. The mansion looked completely dead from the street. But inside the house was alive. Detective Foster was stationed silently in the dining room alongside 2 tactical uniform officers. An investigative journalist named Dana Whitfield, who had been tracking regional deed fraud syndicates, was hidden inside my upstairs turret room with a high-definition low-light camera focused directly on the front entryway. I sat calmly in an armchair in the dark front parlor, wearing my heavy winter coat, holding the folder containing my legitimate property deed right on my lap. For my entire life, my family had set a holiday table that purposefully excluded me. Tonight, in the pitch black, I had finally set a table of my own. Every single seat was occupied by the authorities. And right on cue, I heard the faint sound of tires crunching against the snow in my driveway. The footsteps climbed up the front porch steps. I heard the scratch of the locksmith's tools sliding into my deadbolt. But what my brother said right before he opened the door completely destroyed any remaining shred of mercy I had left in my heart. What did he say? The final confrontation happens right now. The metallic click of the lock echoing through the dark hall was a sound I will never forget. The heavy oak front door swung inward, and my family stepped into my home uninvited for the very first time. Megan entered first, slicing through the darkness with a high-powered flashlight. Travis marched right behind her, completely abandoning any attempt at whispering. The moment he crossed my threshold, 32 years of unearned entitlement came roaring to the surface. "Will you look at the sheer size of this asset?" Travis bragged, his voice booming into the dark corridors as if he already owned the place. He was literally waving a piece of paper in the air, the forged quitclaim deed. All this luxury for her, and she didn't even have the drive to utilize it. Now it belongs to us. The hired locksmith hovered anxiously by the doorframe, visibly sensing that something felt deeply illegal about the situation. Megan was already barking orders, mapping out the perimeter. "We change every single lock tonight. By tomorrow morning, we are the residents in physical possession. Legally, nobody can dispute physical possession." My mother and father walked in last, moving slowly. My mother looked around the towering ceilings and whispered, "It's so grand, Travis." And then Travis laughed, a dry, cruel sound that severed my last remaining tie to them. "She never belonged in an estate like this anyway," he scoffed, adjusting his coat. "She never actually belonged anywhere." That was my cue. I reached out in the dark, gripped the switch of the antique parlor lamp, and flooded the entire hallway with blinding light. My family froze instantly, caught mid-step like statues, blinking violently against the sudden illumination. Before their brains could process my presence, Detective Foster stepped out from the dining room archway, his police badge held high. "Police Department. Nobody move. Keep your hands exactly where we can see them." From the stairs, Dana Whitfield's camera shutter began firing in rapid succession, capturing every ounce of shock, guilt, and terror freezing their faces. I stood up from my armchair, holding my legal file folder, and walked out into the center of my hallway. Travis's jaw dropped open. He looked at me, then looked at the uniform officer scaling the hallway, his face twisting into an ugly mask of panic. What is this?" he stammered, his voice cracking into a high pitch. "What did you do, Charlotte?" "Merry Christmas, Travis," I said. My voice was completely calm, devoid of any trembling. "You can drop the fraudulent paperwork now. The officers would prefer it if you didn't wave evidence around." Travis completely exploded. He lost all composure, his face turning an angry shade of purple as he screamed, "This is my house. It's completely legal. I have the signed deeds. You set us up. You are always trying to destroy this family." Megan had gone completely ghost white, dropping her flashlight to the floorboards. Her calculated mind was clearly running through the state penal codes and realizing there was absolutely no escape hatch. My mother slapped both hands over her mouth, dissolving into tears, while my father stood completely immobilized, staring at me with an expression I had never seen in his eyes in 36 years. Absolute shame. Visual close-up of handcuffs clicking around Travis's wrists. B-roll of flashing police lights reflecting on the snowy windows. Detective Foster remained completely professional, drowning out Travis's screams by reading him his constitutional rights. He systematically listed the evidence. The fraudulent filing on December 3rd, the digital text trail establishing clear financial motive, and the hired locksmith who was already frantically telling the officers he had been completely misled. The steel handcuffs clicked loudly around my brother's wrists, right in my front entrance hall, while a journalist captured the entire downfall on film. Megan was detained right beside him. My mother collapsed toward me, sobbing hysterically. Charlotte, please stop this. We can fix this internally. We are family." I looked at her for one final long moment. I didn't yell. I delivered my next words with a quiet, peaceful finality that hit her harder than any shout ever could. "There were always more than enough chairs at the table, Mom," I whispered. "You just explicitly chose to never set one for me. So tonight I finally set the table myself. And I set it for the police." The flashing red and blue emergency lights painted the high plaster ceilings of my historic home. My mother had absolutely nothing left to say. The woman who had spent a lifetime deciding who was worthy of belonging was completely broken. My father didn't run away or scream. As the police guided Travis and Megan out into the snow, my father slowly lowered himself onto the bottom step of my grand staircase, buried his face in his weathered hands, and wept. I walked over and stood a few feet away. "I always knew it was entirely wrong," he choked out, refusing to look up. "What we did to you. The chairs. The holiday exclusions. I knew it every single December, Charlotte. And I stayed completely silent. I didn't offer him cheap comfort because what they did wasn't okay. True forgiveness is a monumental mountain that you have to actively earn, not a gift you get handed at the bottom of a victim's staircase." But for the first time I saw him clearly. A weak man who had spent 40 years sacrificing his own daughter to manage his wife's unresolved mental demons. "Why?" I asked him softly. "Why was it always only me?" He finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot, and revealed the final missing piece of the math. He told me about the first pregnancy, a baby girl born and tragically lost before I was ever conceived. My mother had never climbed out of that dark hole of grief. When I was born shortly after, my mother viewed my presence not as a blessing, but as an insulting attempt by the universe to replace a child who could never be replaced. It was the yellow blanket inside the tarnished silver frame. It was the winter depression at the window. It explained the entire sick, twisted psychology of my childhood. But explaining it did absolutely nothing to excuse it. "She grieved a lost daughter," I said entirely out loud. "By completely erasing the living daughter she actually had." My father had no answer. He simply followed the officers out into the freezing night. Here is the official aftermath of that chaotic night. Travis and Megan were formally charged with multiple counts of grand property forgery and filing fraudulent state instruments. The case never even made it to a jury trial. The digital evidence binder I provided was completely unassailable, and the physical deed bore their direct fingerprints. Megan took a plea deal, turning state's evidence to testify that Travis was the one who physically executed the forged signatures. Both of them are convicted felons today. The $90,000 debt Travis tried to escape didn't disappear. It just now sits squarely on top of a permanent criminal record. Ruth Calloway filed an emergency injunction, and a state judge officially voided the fraudulent deed within weeks, restoring my sole ownership. Dana's investigative feature ran on the front page of the regional newspaper right after the new year. She protected my identity, but she exposed the brutal reality of deed fraud, proving that the person most likely to steal your sanctuary is the very person you would normally invite over for dinner. Her article triggered a massive wave of awareness, forcing hundreds of local residents to register for their own county fraud alerts. My mother was never criminally charged due to a lack of direct signatures on the paperwork, but the social penalty was absolute. The woman who spent her entire existence curating a flawless family image from the outside had to watch the entire community discover exactly what she was. She and I will never speak again. My father sends me handwritten letters now. His script shaky and old. I read them. I haven't written back yet, but I haven't burned them either. As for the historic mansion on Maple Hollow, I replaced every single lock myself the very next morning, and I verify my property fraud alert status every single week before I even pour my morning coffee. This past December, I finally set that grand long table by the windows. I didn't set it for blood relatives. I filled all 12 seats with the individuals who actually choose to show up for me every day. My dedicated employees who became my real family, cousin Patty, who turned out to be incredibly loyal once the gossip cleared, and my wonderful new neighbors. 12 chairs, every single one of them occupied on purpose. For 20 years of my life, I genuinely believed that belonging was a magical permit that only my parents could grant or withhold from me. Like a chair they purposely chose to leave hidden away in the attic. I was completely wrong. Belonging was never theirs to give, and it was never theirs to take away. It was a table I simply had to build and set for myself. If you are currently sitting in the hallway of your own life, counting chairs and coming up short, listen to me. Quit waiting for an invitation to a table where you aren't valued. Go out there, build your own fortress, lock your own door, and set a table of your own. Thank you so much for staying with me through this journey. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Have a beautiful holiday, and I will see you in the next story.